Amanda Foster's footsteps echoed through the sterile corridors of St. Mary's Hospital, each click of her sensible shoes a reminder of how far she had fallen. Just 3 years ago, she had been a rising star in the corporate world, with a corner office and a 6-figure salary. Now at 38, she was starting over as a lowly orderly, grateful for even this meager opportunity. As she pushed her cleaning cart past the nurse's station, Amanda felt the weight of judgmental stares. She knew what they were thinking. Ex-con, jailbird, not to be trusted. The whispers followed her like a shadow. "Did you hear about the new orderly?" One nurse murmured to another. "I heard she did time for embezzlement." Amanda gritted her teeth and kept her head down. She had learned the hard way that protesting her innocence only made things worse. Better to stay quiet and let her work speak for itself. As she finished mopping the floor in room 301, a shrill voice cut through the air. "Foster, Dr. Reynolds wants you in the ER, stat." Amanda's heart sank. Dr. Reynolds, the head of the emergency department, had made it clear from day one that he considered her nothing more than a criminal who had no business in his hospital. Every interaction with him left her feeling small and worthless. Taking a deep breath, Amanda steeled herself for another confrontation. "This too shall pass," she whispered, her mother's favorite saying becoming a mantra in these difficult days. With squared shoulders, she made her way to the emergency room, unaware that her life was about to change forever. The moment Amanda pushed through the swinging doors of the ER, she was assaulted by a stench so foul it made her eyes water. Gagging, she saw Dr. Reynolds standing near a curtained-off area, a handkerchief pressed firmly to his nose. "Ah, Foster," he sneered, his voice muffled. "Just the person for this delicate situation. We have a John Doe, homeless by the looks of him, with a nasty wound that needs cleaning before we can treat it. Think you can handle that, or is it above your pay grade?" Amanda bit back a retort. "I'll take care of it, Dr. Reynolds." "See that you do," he replied, already turning away. "And Foster, try not to steal anything while you're at it." The casual cruelty of his words stung, but Amanda pushed the hurt aside. She had a job to do, and by God, she was going to do it well. Approaching the bed, Amanda's stomach churned at the sight before her. The man was filthy, his clothes caked with grime, and what looked suspiciously like dried blood. A ragged wound gaped on his side, angry and red. "Okay, buddy," Amanda murmured, snapping on a pair of gloves. "Let's get you cleaned up." As she worked, gently wiping away layers of dirt and revealing the man beneath, Amanda couldn't shake a nagging feeling of familiarity. There was something about the curve of his jaw, the arch of his eyebrows. Suddenly, the man's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glazed with pain. He mumbled something unintelligible, but it was enough. Amanda stumbled back, her heart pounding. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Ethan?" Amanda's mind reeled as she stared at the man on the bed. Ethan Miller, her former boss, the man she had once admired and respected, the man whose actions had cost her everything. 3 years ago, Ethan had been the golden boy of Miller Enterprises, the nephew of the company's founder and heir apparent to the corporate throne. Amanda had been his executive assistant, proud to work alongside such a charismatic and seemingly principled man. But then came the scandal. Millions of dollars gone without a trace, all evidence pointing to Ethan, who had vanished overnight, and Amanda caught in the crossfire, accused of being his accomplice. She remembered the trial, the hostile faces of the jury, the damning testimony of Victoria Miller, Ethan's aunt and the company's CFO. Of course she was involved, Victoria had said, her voice dripping with venom. She was always fawning over Ethan, ready to do anything for him. I'm sure he promised her a cut of the money. Despite her protests, despite the lack of concrete evidence, Amanda had been convicted. 3 years of her life, gone. And now here was Ethan, the architect of her downfall, lying broken and helpless before her. A dark part of Amanda whispered that this was her chance for revenge. Who would notice if the wound became infected? Who would care if this John Doe didn't make it through the night? But even as the thought crossed her mind, Amanda felt ashamed. She was many things, but she wasn't a murderer. With a heavy sigh, she returned to her task, cleaning Ethan's wound with as much care as she could muster. You better survive this, Ethan, she muttered. You owe me some answers. As she finished, Dr. Reynolds returned, eyeing her work critically. Well, Foster, looks like you found a kindred spirit. Try not to plan any heists together, will you? Amanda said nothing, gathering her supplies with trembling hands. As she left the ER, her mind was a whirlwind of questions. What had happened to Ethan? Where had he been all this time? And most importantly, would his reappearance finally clear her name? The neon sign of Miller Enterprises cast a sickly green glow over the sidewalk as Amanda stood across the street, lost in thought. She hadn't meant to come here after her shift, but her feet had carried her almost unconsciously to this place that had once been the center of her world. Amanda? Amanda Foster, is that you? The voice startled her out of her reverie. Turning, she found herself face to face with Rachel Chen, her former colleague and friend. Rachel, what are you doing here? Rachel's smile was tinged with sadness. I could ask you the same thing, but let's not do this on the street. Coffee? Minutes later, they were ensconced in a nearby cafe, steaming mugs before them. Rachel studied Amanda's face, taking in the new lines of strain and weariness. God, Amanda, I'm so sorry about everything that happened. We all knew you weren't involved. But Victoria, she was out for blood. Amanda's hands tightened around her mug. What happened after I was gone? Rachel sighed, running a hand through her short black hair. It was a nightmare. With Ethan gone and you in prison, Victoria took control. She brought in this new head of security, a real piece of work. Together they've been running the company into the ground. Mass layoffs, cut corners, the works. Old man George, Ethan's uncle, he just checked out. Rumor has it he's holed up in his country estate, doesn't even come to the office anymore. And Ethan? Amanda asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Did he ever? Rachel shook her head. Not a peep. Victoria kept insisting she had leads, that he'd been spotted in the Caymans or wherever, but nothing ever came of it. Amanda, she leaned forward, her voice dropping. Some of us, we started to wonder if maybe Victoria had something to do with Ethan's disappearance. The timing was just too convenient, you know? Amanda felt a chill run down her spine. Could it be true? Had she spent 3 years in prison for a crime that not only she hadn't committed, but that might never have happened at all? Rachel, there's something I need to tell you, Amanda began, but she was cut off by the shrill ring of Rachel's phone. Damn, I have to take this. Amanda, it was so good to see you. We should catch up properly soon, okay? With a quick hug, Rachel was gone, leaving Amanda alone with her thoughts and a rapidly cooling cup of coffee. As she sat there, a plan began to form in Amanda's mind. It was risky, possibly even foolish, but she knew she had to try. It was time to confront the man who held the keys to her past and possibly her future. It was time to pay a visit to George Miller. The iron gates of the Miller estate loomed before Amanda, a formidable barrier between her and the truth she sought. Her finger hovered over the intercom button, doubt gnawing at her resolve. Was she really going to do this? Confront a man she'd never met? A man who probably believed her to be a thief and a liar? Before she could second-guess herself further, Amanda pressed the button. A crackle of static, then a gruff voice. Miller Residence. State your business. Amanda took a deep breath. My name is Amanda Foster. I need to speak with Mr. George Miller about his nephew Ethan. A long pause followed, during which Amanda was sure her thundering heartbeat could be heard through the intercom. Finally, the voice returned. Wait there. Minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity. Just as Amanda was considering giving up and leaving, the gates began to swing open with a ponderous creak. A burly security guard met her at the front door, eyeing her suspiciously as he led her through the opulent house. Amanda tried not to gawk at the crystal chandeliers and priceless artworks that adorned every surface. This was wealth beyond her wildest imagination. They emerged onto a vast back patio where a solitary figure sat in a wheelchair, gazing out over manicured gardens. George Miller turned as they approached, and Amanda had to stifle a gasp. This was not the titan of industry she had expected, but a man aged far beyond his years, his face etched with lines of grief and bitterness. So, George said, his voice a dry rasp, "You're the girl who claims to have information about my nephew." Amanda straightened her spine. "Mr. Miller, my name is Amanda Foster. I worked for your company 3 years ago as Ethan's executive assistant. I was convicted of helping him embezzle money, but sir, I swear to you I'm innocent, and I have reason to believe Ethan might be too." George's eyes narrowed. "And why, Miss Foster, should I believe a word you say?" "Because," Amanda replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart, "I saw Ethan today. He was brought into St. Mary's Hospital as a John Doe. He's alive, Mr. Miller, but he's in bad shape. And I think he might have been hiding all this time, maybe even held against his will." For a moment, a flicker of something, hope, fear, passed across George's face, but it was quickly replaced by his previous mask of indifference. "An interesting story, Miss Foster, but I fail to see how this concerns me. My nephew made his choices. He betrayed this family, this company. Why should I care what's become of him?" Amanda took a step forward, impassioned. "Because he's your family, Mr. Miller, and because I think there's more to this story than any of us know. Please just look into it, for Ethan's sake and for mine. I've lost 3 years of my life to this scandal. I just want the truth." George studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally he spoke. "Which hospital did you say he was in?" "St. Mary's," Amanda replied, a glimmer of hope rising in her chest. George nodded once, then turned his wheelchair back toward the gardens. "You may go now, Miss Foster." As the security guard led her back to the gates, Amanda felt a mix of frustration and cautious optimism. She hadn't gotten the answer she'd hoped for, but she had planted a seed. Now all she could do was wait and see if it would grow. Amanda's footsteps faltered as she approached St. Mary's the next morning. Something was different. The air crackled with tension, and raised voices could be heard even before she entered the building. Pushing through the main doors, she was met with chaos. Staff rushed back and forth, their faces a mix of excitement and apprehension. Through the window to the courtyard, Amanda spotted Dr. Reynolds pacing furiously, his cell phone pressed to his ear. "What do you mean, a full audit?" he shouted, his face turning an alarming shade of red. "This is outrageous. I run a tight ship here, and I won't have some outsiders coming in and—" "What? The board of directors? But how? Who authorized this?" A hand grabbed Amanda's arm, startling her. It was Nurse Jenny, her eyes wide with excitement. "Amanda, you'll never believe what's happening. Some big-shot surgeon flew in last night, Dr. Hawthorne, the neurology genius from Johns Hopkins. He operated on that John Doe you cleaned up yesterday." Amanda's heart leapt. "Ethan, I mean, the homeless man, is he okay?" Jenny nodded enthusiastically. "More than okay. He woke up this morning and started talking. It's like a miracle. And get this, turns out he's not a nobody after all. He's some rich guy's nephew or something." The whole hospital's buzzing. As if to emphasize her point, a commotion erupted down the hall. Amanda turned to see a group of serious-looking men and women in suits, striding purposefully toward the administrative offices. "Oh boy," Jenny whispered. "Those must be the auditors Dr. Reynolds was yelling about. Rumor has it they're uncovering all sorts of violations. Reynolds is toast for sure." Amanda's mind whirled. Could it be that her visit to George Miller had set all this in motion? She had to see Ethan. Had to know if he remembered what had really happened 3 years ago. She made her way toward Ethan's room, her heart pounding. But as she rounded the corner, she came face to face with a familiar figure, one that made her blood run cold. Victoria Miller stood before her, her perfectly coiffed hair and designer suit a stark contrast to the hospital's sterile environment. Her eyes narrowed as she recognized Amanda. "Well, well," Victoria sneered, "if it isn't the little jailbird. Come to finish the job you started, have you?" Amanda stood her ground. "I don't know what you mean, Mrs. Miller. I work here now. I'm just doing my job." Victoria took a step closer, her voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "Listen to me, you little tramp. I don't know how you found Ethan or what kind of game you're playing, but it ends now. You've already served your time. Walk away now. And maybe you can keep this pitiful little job of yours. Push this any further, and I'll make sure you regret it." Before Amanda could respond, another voice cut through the tension. "That's enough, Victoria." Both women turned to see George Miller approaching in his wheelchair, flanked by 2 of the suited auditors. His eyes, which had seemed so dull and lifeless at the estate, now burned with a renewed fire. "Mr. Miller," Victoria stammered, her composure slipping. I was just—" "Save it," George cut her off. "Miss Foster, would you mind giving me a moment with my sister-in-law? I believe we have some family business to discuss." As Amanda hastily retreated, she could hear the beginning of what promised to be an epic confrontation. She leaned against the wall, her legs suddenly weak. After 3 long years, it seemed the truth was finally coming to light. But what would that truth mean for her? And for Ethan, only time would tell. Amanda's world had become a whirlwind of activity and emotion. In the days following Ethan's miraculous recovery and the subsequent upheaval at St. Mary's, she found herself at the center of a storm she could scarcely comprehend. She was in the middle of her shift, mechanically mopping the floor of the East Wing corridor, when a familiar voice called out to her. "Miss Foster, might I have a word?" Amanda looked up to see George Miller wheeling towards her, his eyes kinder than she had ever seen them. Nervously, she set her mop aside. "Of course, Mr. Miller. How can I help you?" George gestured to a nearby waiting area. Amanda followed George Miller to the waiting area, her heart pounding with anticipation. As they settled into the uncomfortable plastic chairs, George cleared his throat. "Miss Foster, I owe you an apology," he began, his voice heavy with regret. "I've been a fool, blinded by grief and manipulated by those I should have questioned. Thanks to your actions, the truth has finally come to light." He went on to explain that Ethan's surgery had not only healed his physical wounds, but had also restored his memory. The story Ethan told was one of betrayal and deceit, implicating Victoria and the head of security in a complex scheme of embezzlement and attempted murder. "And you, Miss Foster," George continued, his eyes meeting hers, "were nothing more than a convenient scapegoat. I cannot begin to express how sorry I am for the injustice you've suffered." Amanda felt tears welling up in her eyes, years of pent-up emotion threatening to overflow. "Thank you, Mr. Miller," she managed to say. "But what happens now?" George's expression turned resolute. "Now we make things right. I've already spoken with my lawyers. We'll be petitioning for your conviction to be overturned. And of course, you'll be fully compensated for your time in prison and loss of career opportunities." He paused, then added with a small smile, "And if you're interested, there's a position waiting for you at Miller Enterprises. Not as an assistant this time, but in management. It's the least we can do." Amanda was overwhelmed. After years of struggle and despair, it seemed her life was about to change dramatically once again, but this time, for the better. 1 year later, Amanda stood in the gleaming lobby of Miller Enterprises, barely recognizing the place. Gone was the atmosphere of suspicion and cutthroat competition that had permeated the company under Victoria's leadership. In its place was a sense of innovation and teamwork. Amanda, now the vice president of operations, had been instrumental in the company's transformation. Her unique experience, from executive assistant to wrongfully convicted felon to her triumphant return, had given her invaluable insights into improving the company's ethics, efficiency, and employee satisfaction. As she made her way to her corner office, Amanda's phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. "Don't forget, dinner with Uncle George tonight. He's excited about the baby news." Amanda smiled, her hand unconsciously moving to her slightly rounded belly. Her relationship with Ethan had been unexpected, born out of shared trauma and redemption. As they had worked together to rebuild Miller Enterprises and their own lives, they had fallen in love. Their wedding 6 months ago had been a joyous affair, with George beaming proudly as he walked Amanda down the aisle. And now, with a baby on the way, it felt like their journey had come full circle. As Amanda entered the boardroom for the morning meeting, she caught sight of her reflection in the polished table. Gone was the defeated, desperate woman who had once cleaned hospital floors. In her place stood a confident executive, respected by her peers and valued for her integrity and insight. Ethan joined her a moment later, squeezing her hand under the table as George called the meeting to order. As discussions of quarterly projections and new initiatives filled the air, Amanda marveled at how far they had all come. After the meeting, Ethan pulled her aside. "Ready for lunch? I thought we could try that new place down the street." Amanda smiled, her eyes full of love and gratitude. "With you, always." As they left the office together, Amanda reflected on the twists of fate that had brought her to this moment. From the depths of despair to the heights of success, her journey had been one of resilience, forgiveness, and the enduring power of truth. Miller Enterprises, once the downfall, had become the stage for her redemption. And as she stepped into the bright sunshine with Ethan by her side, Amanda Foster knew that the best was yet to come. That evening, as they shared the news of their expected child with an overjoyed George, Amanda felt a sense of completeness she had never known before. Her career was flourishing, her name was cleared, and she was surrounded by love and support. As George raised a toast to the future, Amanda caught Ethan's eye and smiled. They had weathered the storm together, and now they were ready to embrace the bright future ahead as executives, as partners, and soon as parents. The journey hadn't been easy, but as Amanda looked around at her family, both by blood and by choice, she knew that every hardship had led her to this moment, and she wouldn't have changed a thing.